Hello. We have a massive subject to cover today. And it's a topic that feels particularly heavy given the timeline we're currently on.
It does.
We are going to be discussing the definitive heavy metal band. The group that didn't just participate in a genre, but really built the blueprint for it from the ground up in the industrial grayness of Birmingham, England.
We're talking about Black Sabbath.
And it is a significant moment to be having this conversation. As we sit here in February of 2026, the world is still very much processing the final chapter of the band.
Very much so. We've just had the release of the concert film, Back to the Beginning, Ozzy's Final Bow, which came out earlier this year.
And we are only, 7 or 8 months removed from the passing of Ozzy Osbourne in July of 2025?
It feels like the book that's been in the writing since 1968 has officially closed.
So our mission for today is to walk through that entire history. We're going to look at the extensive biographical records, the studio logs, and all the historical documentation of their career.
We want to understand how it happened.
Exactly. How 4 men from a factory town changed music forever, and how they managed to sustain through decades of, everything. Lineup changes, substance abuse, shifting musical landscapes, right up until the very end.
And to really understand the end and the massive legacy they've left behind, you have to go back. You have to understand the beginning. The environment where Black Sabbath formed is almost as important as the members themselves.
Let's do that. Let's go back to 1968. We're in Aston, Birmingham, and this is not the swinging London of the 60s that you see in film.
No, it's a stark contrast. A completely different world from the flower power and psychedelia that was happening elsewhere. Aston was a heavy industrial backdrop.
So you've got factories, pollution.
A very working class struggle.
Yeah.
It was loud and it was bleak. And that atmosphere, it really seeped into the psyche of the young men living there.
And that's where we find the members.
Right. You had Tony Iommi on guitar and Bill Ward on drums. They had been working together in a band called Mythology. And when that dissolved, they were looking to form a new sort of heavy blues rock band.
So they needed a bassist and a singer to complete the lineup. This brings us to a pretty famous anecdote about how they found Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy had placed an advertisement in a local music shop. It was very direct. I just read, Ozzy ZYZI needs gig. Has own PA.
Has own TA. That's the important part.
That's the key. Geezer Butler, the bassist, saw this ad. Now, he and Ozzy had actually played together before in a band called Rare Breed.
So he knew who he was.
He knew who he was, so the 4 of them came together.
Mm-hmm.
But they did not start as Black Sabbath.
No, they went through a few identity crises first. I believe the first name was the Polkatuck Blues Band.
That's correct, the Polkatuck Blues Band. The origin of that name is a matter of some debate in the historical record.
Really?
Yeah. Some sources will tell you it was taken from a brand of talcum powder. Others suggest it was the name of an Indian or Pakistani clothing shop. It's a little confused.
And at that time, the lineup was actually bigger, wasn't it?
It was. They had a slide guitarist named Jimmy Phillips and a saxophonist, a man named Alan Aker Clark.
It's almost impossible to imagine Black Sabbath with a saxophone player.
Well, it didn't last long. Iommi felt the extra members just weren't taking it seriously enough. So rather than firing them directly, the core 4 kind of broke up and then quietly reformed without them.
A classic band move.
The classic move.
Yeah.
They shortened the name to just Polkatuck for a bit, and then eventually they changed it to Earth.
Earth. It's a solid name, but it doesn't quite carry the weight of what was to come.
No.
And something happened during this early period that effectively created the sound of heavy metal. And it wasn't a musical choice, not initially. It was a physical necessity, all revolving around Tony Iommi's accident.
This is, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is arguably the single most important moment in the history of the entire genre.
Tell us about it.
Iommi was working in a sheet metal factory. It was his very last day of work. He was about to leave to pursue music full-time, and he was covering a shift for a colleague. And he suffered a terrible industrial accident. A press came down, and he lost the tips of the middle and ring fingers on his right hand.
His fretting hand.
For a guitar player, that should have been a career-ending injury. He was absolutely devastated. He almost gave up music entirely.
But his factory manager, I believe, played him some music by Django Reinhardt, the jazz guitarist who famously played with paralyzed fingers, and that inspired him to keep going.
It provided the motivation, yes, but Iommi still had to innovate to make it physically possible to play the guitar. He created these homemade prosthetics.
What were they made of?
He melted down plastic bottles, like from dish soap, and then used leather from an old jacket to cap off his missing fingertips. But even with those, pressing down on standard heavy guitar strings was incredibly painful and difficult.
So he had to make some adjustments.
Two crucial adjustments. First, he started using lighter gauge banjo strings on his guitar because they were just easier to bend and press down. Second, and this is the absolute key, he detuned the guitar.
He tuned it down.
He tuned it down. Eventually, he'd settle on C-sharp standard. By tuning down, he reduced the tension on the strings, which made them easier for him to press with his injured hand.
But the sonic side effect?
The sonic side effect was that it created a much looser, deeper, heavier, and sludgier tone. That sound became the signature of the band. It was dark, it was menacing, completely distinct from the brighter rock sounds of the era.
It's that slack string sound.
Exactly. The slack strings vibrated differently against the pickups and the fretboard, creating a unique kind of distortion that just didn't exist in rock music at that time.
And combined with that, they started using a specific musical interval that really defined the mood, the atmosphere of the music.
The tritone, also known as the devil's interval, or diabolus in music and in Latin.
Why is it called that?
It's an interval of 3 whole tones that creates a very dissonant, unresolved, and tense sound. It was famously avoided in medieval church music because of its unstable, unsettling quality.
And Black Sabbath just embraced it.
They leaned right into it. It created this ominous atmosphere that perfectly matched their industrial surroundings and the themes they were starting to write about. It creates a sense of unease in you, the listener, because your ear wants the note to resolve, but the tritone just leaves it hanging there in a state of tension.
So they have the sound, they have the mood, but they're still called Earth. And that had to change.
It did. There was another band with that name, another English group, and they were getting mistaken for them.
So they needed a new name.
They needed a change. And the inspiration came from right across the street from their rehearsal room. There was a cinema, and it was showing the 1963 Boris Karloff horror film, Black Sabbath.
And Geezer Butler made an observation about the people going to see it?
He did. He noted how strange it was that people would spend so much money to see scary movies, that they actually enjoyed being frightened.
So he thought, why not do that with music?
Exactly. Why can't music do that? This led to them writing the song Black Sabbath. It was based on a vision Geezer Butler had of a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed.
And that song used the tritone.
It used that tritone interval. The lyrics were dark and occult themed, and they just realized, this is it. This is our identity. So in August 1969, they officially changed the band name to Black Sabbath.
And that leads us right into the 1970s and what everyone coined the classic era. They get into the studio to record the debut album, simply titled Black Sabbath, and the recording process for this was fast.
It was remarkably efficient. They were given 2 days in November 1969, 1 day to record, 1 day to mix.
That's it?
That's it. They essentially played their live set in the studio. Ozzy sang in a separate booth, but Iommi recalls that they basically played live and didn't even have a second take for most of the songs. It just captures the raw energy of a band that had been gigging relentlessly in small clubs.
And the album was released on Friday the 13th, February 1970. What was the initial reaction?
It's a classic case of critical failure and commercial success. The critics, well, they absolutely hated it.
I didn't get it.
Not at all. Lester Bangs, a very prominent rock critic at the time, dismissed it as discordant jams and compared it to velocitized speed freaks.
But the audience felt differently.
The audience connected with it immediately. It reached number 8 in the UK charts and number 23 in the US. It resonated with a generation that, maybe felt the whole flower power movement didn't really speak to their reality.
That opening track, with the rain and the thunder and that bell, it immediately signals this is something different.
Completely. And they didn't rest on that success. They went right back to work for Paranoid, which was released later that same year in 1970.
The work ethic was incredible.
Intense. Most of the songs for Paranoid were actually developed during a residency they did in Zurich, Switzerland, at a place called the Beat Club.
What was that like?
They were playing 7 45-minute sets a day.
7 sets?
A day.
A day. That amount of playing time just forced them to improvise and extend their jams, which then evolved into the songs you hear on the album. War Pigs, for example, evolved from a long jam session during those sets. And the title track, Paranoid, which became their biggest hit, was almost an afterthought, wasn't it?
It was a total filler track. They had finished the album, and the producer told them they were short on running time. They needed one more short song.
Just to fill up the space on the vinyl.
Exactly. So Iommi just started playing the riff, and the band wrote and recorded the entire song in about 20 to 25 minutes.
Unbelievable.
and it became their only top 10 UK hit. It defined them for a massive audience, yet it was the song they spent the absolute least amount of time on.
Moving into 1971, we get Master of Reality, and this is where the sound gets even heavier.
This is where Iommi began downtuning even further to that C-sharp standard we mentioned to ease the tension on his fingers, and it just created this massive, all-consuming wall of sound effect.
But this album also introduced some new textures.
Yes, you hear acoustic tracks for the first time, like Solitude and Orchid. It showed they weren't just about volume and power, but the context here is also their lifestyle. They were starting to earn real money, and with that came significant substance abuse.
And that escalated with the next album, Volume 4, in 1972. They went to Los Angeles to record this one.
The working title for Volume 4 was actually Snowblind.
Which tells you everything you need to know.
It tells you everything you need to know about the primary influence during those sessions. The record company, of course, refused to release an album with a direct drug reference as the title, so it became Volume 4.
It was a chaotic time.
It was.
Yeah.
There are reports that the budget for cocaine was actually higher than the budget for recording the album.
Wow.
And Bill Ward, the drummer, really struggled during this period. There's a well-known story about him trying to record the song Cornucopia. He was having trouble getting the pattern right, likely due to the state everyone was in, and he felt like he was about to be fired.
The pressure must have been immense.
He eventually nailed it, but the tension was clearly mounting within the band.
So after that, they took a break and then tried to follow it up with Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath in 1973. But they hit a wall.
A total wall. Writer's block. They went back to Los Angeles, rented a house in Bel Air, and Iommi just couldn't find the riffs. He had nothing. The distractions and the fatigue were just too high.
So they made a radical change of scenery.
They did. They returned to England and rented Clearwell Castle in the Forest of Dean.
Recording in a dungeon seems to fit the Black Sabbath aesthetic pretty well.
It certainly was atmospheric. They set up their gear and rehearsed in the dungeons of the castle, and Iommi has said that the creepy atmosphere just conjured something up in him.
And that's where the block was broken.
That's where he came up with the main riff for the song Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. And once he had that, the rest of the album just flowed. And that album was a significant step forward musically.
How so?
They brought in synthesizers, strings, much more complex arrangements. Rick Wakeman from the band, yes, even came into play on a track.
Yeah.
It showed a maturity and a finesse that critics finally started to acknowledge.
But the business side of things started to get messy around 1975 with the album Sabotage.
The title itself, Sabotage, was a direct reference to their legal battles. They were in litigation with their former management, and it was getting very ugly.
I read that Ozzy was actually handed a subpoena while on stage during a tour.
That's true. It was an incredibly stressful time, and the music reflects that. It's an angry, harder-rocking album. It's a step back from the experimentation of the previous record. You can really hear the frustration in Ozzy's voice on tracks like The Writ.
Following that, though, we start to see a decline. Technical Ecstasy in 1976 and Never Say Die in 1978.
The momentum was stalling. On Technical Ecstasy, they started moving away from their signature doom sound toward a more up-tempo, almost mainstream rock sound, and the fans were a bit confused by it.
And internally, Ozzy was losing interest.
He was. In fact, he actually quit the band for a short time in late 1977.
Right. And many people forget that they actually hired a different singer, a man named Dave Walker, for a brief period.
They did. Dave Walker, who had been in Fleetwood Mac, he even appeared with them on a TV program in England, performing an early version of the song Junior's Eyes. But then Ozzy had a change of heart and returned just before they went into the studio for Never Say Die.
But the return was short-lived. The recording sessions for that album, which took place in Toronto, were reportedly a disaster.
It was described as a conveyor belt of chaos. They had no songs written when they arrived. They were freezing cold in Canada, and the drug use was heavily impacting their ability to perform. Ozzy apparently refused to sing some of the material they came up with.
And by 1979, it was clear it couldn't continue.
No. Iommi came to the decision that either Ozzy had to go or the band would break up completely.
And Bill Ward was the one who had to deliver the news?
Iommi chose Ward to do it because he and Ozzy were so close. It was a devastating moment for both of them. But Ozzy was officially fired in April 1979 due to his unreliability and escalating substance abuse.
It marked the end of an era. For many fans at the time, it really seemed like the end of the band.
It certainly felt that way. But it wasn't the end of Black Sabbath. They brought in Ronnie James Dio. And this wasn't just a simple replacement. It was a fundamental shift in the band's style.
A complete reinvention.
Absolutely. Ronnie James Dio, who had been in Rainbow with Ritchie Blackmore, had a very different vocal approach. Iommi has explained that Ozzy used to sing with the riff. He would sort of mimic the guitar melody.
He followed the riff.
He followed the riff. Dio, on the other hand, sang across the riff. He brought these powerful, soaring melody lines that were independent of the guitar work.
And he also brought different lyrical themes.
Completely different. The lyrics shifted towards fantasy and mythology, wizards, dragons, battles between good and evil, rather than the horror and grim reality-based lyrics of the Ozzy era.
And it worked. The album Heaven and Hell in 1980 was a massive success.
It was a huge critical and commercial resurgence. The band sounded re-energized, powerful. However, the lineup stability, that didn't last.
Bill Ward left.
Bill Ward left mid-tour in August 1980. He was struggling badly with alcoholism and also with the grief of Ozzy's firing.
Right.
He just couldn't continue.
And he was replaced by Vinny Appice.
Correct. And they recorded the next album, Mob Rules, in 1981 with this new lineup.
Another solid album.
Very solid. Recorded at John Lennon's old house, Tittenhurst Park. But the tension returned during the mixing of their live album, Live Evil, the following year.
This involves the story about the volume levels in the mix.
It's a bizarre dispute, really.
Yeah.
Iommi and Butler accused Dio of sneaking into the studio at night to turn up the volume of his own vocal tracks.
Was it true?
Apparently they were misinformed by the engineer, but the paranoia in the camp was just so high at that point. Dio and Appice took great offense to the accusation and the general atmosphere, and they left the band in 1982 to form their own band, Dio.
So Sabbath is once again looking for a singer. This leads to the, let's call it the Born Again era with Ian Gillan.
Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. On paper, it was a strange pairing. The resulting album, Born Again in 1983, was critically panned, but actually charted surprisingly well.
But the tour for that album is legendary for a production error that famously inspired a scene in the movie This Is Spinal Tap.
The Stonehenge incident.
The Stonehenge incident.
Precisely. Their manager at the time, Don Arden, wanted a Stonehenge stage set. He apparently wrote down the dimensions in meters, but the set builders thought he meant feet, where it might have been the other way around.
Either way, the scale was wrong.
The scale was catastrophically wrong. The end result was a prop that was gargantuan. Some pieces were 45 feet high. It was too large to fit in almost any venue they played.
So what did they do with it?
They had to leave huge pieces of it in storage containers or just try to jam parts of it onto stages however they could. It was a massive embarrassment and a logistical nightmare.
A very literal case of the band being dwarfed by their own stage set.
Ian Gillan has spoken about seeing this massive prop for the first time and just realizing the sheer absurdity of this situation. It really encapsulated the chaos of that period.
After Gillan left to rejoin Deep Purple, the band entered what we might call the wilderness years. It was a revolving door of members.
A period of real instability.
Wow.
In the mid-'80s, Iommi actually wanted to release a solo album. He recorded what became Seventh Star in 1986. But the record label, Warner Bros., refused to release it unless it was billed as a Black Sabbath album.
So they compromised.
The compromise was releasing it as Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi.
And Glenn Hughes was the singer on that album.
For the album, yes. But his time in the band ended very abruptly due to a bar fight. Just before the tour was set to begin, he got into an altercation with the band's production manager.
And he was injured.
Badly. He suffered a splintered orbital bone. It affected his singing voice to the point where he couldn't perform, and he had to be replaced by a singer named Ray Gillan.
Then we enter the Tony Martin era. He was the vocalist for a significant stretch in the late 80s and again in the 90s.
Tony Martin joined for the album The Eternal Idol in 1987, and he actually had the second longest tenure as a vocalist in the band's history after Ozzy.
What was that era like?
Albums like Headless Cross and Tear saw a shift toward mythology and a very polished European-style metal sound. But they struggled with commercial relevance in the U.S. during this time. There was also some controversy when they played a series of shows in Sun City, South Africa during the apartheid era, which drew significant criticism from activists.
The 90s also saw a brief reunion with Ronnie James Dio for the Dehumanizer album in 1992.
That was a heavy, gritty album, a real return to form for many. It did well, but the reunion ended poorly again.
What happened this time?
The band agreed to open for Ozzy Osbourne on his supposed retirement tour at a show in Costa Mesa, California. Dio refused to open for Ozzy. He reportedly called him a clown.
So Dio quit again.
He did, and Rob Halford of Judas Priest had to step in, fill in for those two shows.
That show in Costa Mesa was significant, though, because at the end of it, the original 4 members, Ozzy, Iommi, Geezer, and Bill Ward, came out and played a brief set together. That really planted the seed for a full reunion.
It did, but it took a few more years. They released 2 more albums with Tony Martin, Cross Purposes, and Forbidden. Forbidden was notably produced by Ernie C. of the band Body Count and featured a guest spot from Ice-T. It's generally considered a critical low point for the band.
But finally, in 1997, the stars aligned.
The reunion.
The original lineup.
The original lineup headlined Ozfest in 1997. They released a live album Reunion in 1998, which included 2 new studio tracks. And one of the live tracks from that album, Iron Man, actually won them a Grammy for Best Metal Performance.
30 years after the song was originally written.
Incredible, isn't it? It was a huge moment.
They toured sporadically after that, but a new full studio album kept getting delayed. They tried to record one in 2001 with Rick Rubin, but it was abandoned. And then they went into the Heaven and Hell era.
This is an interesting distinction they made. In 2006, they reunited the Mob Rules lineup. So that's Iommi, Butler, Dio, and Vinny Appice. To avoid confusing fans who are expecting to see Ozzy, they decided to tour and record under the name Heaven and Hell.
And they released a new album.
They released a very well-regarded album called The Devil You Know in 2009.
Sadly, that era came to a tragic end with Ronnie James Dio's death from stomach cancer in May of 2010.
A huge loss for the entire metal community. Following that, the focus returned once again to the original lineup. In November of 2011, the 4 original members had a press conference and announced a new album and a world tour.
But obstacles appeared almost immediately. Tony Iommi was diagnosed with lymphoma in early 2012, and then Bill Ward had a contract dispute.
That's right. Bill Ward released a statement saying he couldn't participate without what he called a signable contract. When that wasn't met, he declined to participate in the reunion.
So when they recorded the album 13, which came out in 2013, it was without him.
Correct. Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine played drums on the album. And that album, produced by Rick Rubin, was a massive success. It went to #1 in the UK, and for the first time ever, it was their first US #1 album.
They followed that with The End Tour, which concluded in their hometown of Birmingham in February 2017. And at the time, they said that was it, the absolute final end.
They did. They took their final bow, fireworks went off, and they officially disbanded.
Yeah.
But as we know now, looking back from our perspective here in 2026, that was not the final chapter.
Post-2017, things remained quiet, but there was always a sort of simmering hope. And then we had the Commonwealth Games in 2022.
That was a wonderful surprise. Birmingham hosted the games, and at the closing ceremony, Ozzy and Iommi appeared together on stage.
And they performed Paranoid.
They did. It was a huge moment for the city, and it showed that the bond, at least between those two, was still there.
And then we get to the events of last year, 2025. This is the part that is now etched in history as the definitive conclusion to the story.
In February of 2025, the announcement came. A show called Back to the Beginning. A final, one-off charity show at Villa Park in Birmingham, scheduled for July 5th, 2025.
And the most significant part of that announcement
was that Bill Ward was back. It was going to be the first performance of the original 4 members in 20 years.
By that point, Ozzy's health had been a major topic of conversation for years. He had officially retired from touring, but he made a very specific promise about this show.
He did. He was quoted as saying, "I'm not going to get up there and do a half-hearted Ozzy. I'm not going up there in a fucking wheelchair." He was absolutely determined to go out standing.
And the show itself, July 5th, 2025, it was a massive event.
It was a global celebration of heavy metal. You had Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Tool, all of these bands that would not exist without Black Sabbath, all there to support them. And then the original 4 played their set. By all accounts, it was emotional, powerful, and triumphant.
But the tragedy followed so very quickly.
Just 17 days later. On July 22nd, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne passed away from a heart attack.
It's still shocking to say it out loud.
It is. It turned that final concert from a celebratory farewell into a eulogy. The funeral procession in Birmingham was massive. It went through Broad Street, and it stopped at the Black Sabbath Bridge. It really solidified the band's inseparable connection to the city.
And now, in early 2026, we have the release of the concert film, Back to the Beginning, Ozzy's Final Bow,
which serves as the final historical document of the band performing together, along with the documentary Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
No Escape from Now, which was released late last year. The story has now been fully told.
And there was a final civic honor as well.
Yes. The 4 original members were made freemen of the city of Birmingham.
Looking at the entirety of this timeline, from that factory accident in 1968 to the final bow in 2025, what is the legacy?
The numbers are there, of course.
Yeah.
Over 70 million records sold, multiple Grammys. But the real legacy is stylistic. They created the blueprint.
For so many genres.
Heavy metal, doom metal, stoner rock, sludge metal. It all goes back to Tony Iommi's detuned guitar and that use of the tritone interval. They took the blues rock of the 60s, they slowed it down, and they added a layer of darkness and realism that music really hadn't seen before.
They made it okay for music to be dark.
They validated that heavy, ominous sound. Bands like Metallica, Nirvana, Iron Maiden, Guns N' Roses, they all cite Sabbath as a primary influence. They're ranked as the greatest metal band of all time by outlets like MTV and Loudwire for a very good reason. They weren't just a band in a genre. They were the origin point.
It's an incredible journey, from a band called Earth getting confused with some other local group to becoming the architects of a global culture.
And ending it right where it all began, in Birmingham. It's a complete circle.
The complete chronological history of Black Sabbath. It's a lot to process, especially with the recent loss of Ozzy, but the music, as always, stands for itself.
It certainly does.
Thanks for listening.